Song Hye-kyo was in the audience last night, and what happened on her face while her husband walked that stage and accepted his award is the kind of thing that makes the entire Hye-kyo fandom forget how to breathe, because what she showed in those unguarded moments while the spotlight was on him and the cameras were supposed to be on the stage tells a story about who these two people are to each other that is more complete and more moving than anything that has ever been said about this relationship in any interview or any official statement or any managed public moment. She was watching him win. And the watching was the story. Not the award. Not the speech. The wife in the audience whose face did something that her years of composure and her decades of managing public visibility could not prevent it from doing, because what she was watching was too important and too personal and too completely hers to be managed into neutrality. Before we get into every jaw-dropping detail, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications, because Hye-kyo updates are coming fast and you absolutely cannot afford to miss a single moment. Now let's talk about what everyone is completely losing their minds over. Song Hye-kyo watching proudly as Lee Min-ho wins big on stage, and every single detail of what her face showed while the world was looking elsewhere. Let us begin by establishing why Song Hye-kyo being in that audience for Lee Min-ho's award is significant before we examine what happened when she was there. Because the being there carries its own weight of meaning that the what happened when she was there is built upon and cannot be fully understood without. Song Hye-kyo does not attend industry events as a supporting presence for anyone. This is not a characterization of her as someone who prioritizes her own visibility over her support for the people she loves. It is a description of the specific and entirely reasonable choice that a woman at her level of celebrity makes about how to manage the intersection of her public life with her private relationships. Attending an award ceremony as the wife of a nominee places her in a context where every camera in the room has a competing claim on her image, where her presence becomes part of the story of the evening in ways that are not always within her control, and where the professional identity she has built across decades of her own extraordinary career becomes temporarily secondary to the relational identity of being someone's wife in a room full of industry observers and photographers and journalists who will document everything they see. She came anyway. She made the specific and deliberate decision to be present in that room in that role, supporting role. The role where the spotlight belongs to someone else and her presence is in service of his moment rather than her own professional identity. She made this decision with full awareness of what it would mean in terms of her own visibility and the nature of the attention it would attract and the specific quality of exposure it would require of her. And she made it because she wanted to be in the room when he won. Not because the event required her presence, or because any external expectation had produced an obligation to attend. Because she wanted to be there. Because being present for his significant professional moments is something that she has decided is part of what she is in his life and part of what their marriage is and part of what she chooses to be in the specific and daily and entirely voluntary way that she chooses everything that matters most to her. The seating arrangement at the ceremony placed her in a position that was simultaneously accessible to the cameras that cover the audience at major award events, and partially protected from the sustained attention that front row placement would have produced. This was a deliberate choice and reflects the same thoughtful navigation of public visibility that characterizes everything about how Lee Min-ho and Song Hye-kyo manage their shared public presence. Close enough to be present in the full sense of the word, able to see clearly and be seen clearly by him when the moment arrived. Positioned with sufficient discretion that the evening did not become primarily about her, rather than about the award and the work being recognized. The placement said the same thing their joint appearance always says. We are here. We are together. This is not the main story of the evening and we are not trying to make it one. She was composed when she arrived. This is the baseline that the subsequent events are measured against, and it matters that the baseline is established clearly. Song Hye-kyo arrived at that venue in the specific quality of composed and elegant presence that she brings to every industry occasion, the presence that reflects decades of learning to inhabit these environments with grace, and with a particular kind of professional warmth that makes her immediately recognizable not just as a celebrity but as someone who knows how to be in a room. She was wearing the kind of thing she wears to significant events. Something that reflected the considered aesthetic judgment of someone who understands that what you wear to support your husband's award moment should honor the moment without competing with it. She looked exactly like Song Hye-kyo. Composed. Elegant. Present. Managing the environment with the ease of long practice. And then the nominations were announced and his name was called and something happened to the composition. Let us be precise about what happened and in what order, because the sequence of her response is as significant as the content of it. The first change was the smallest and the most revealing precisely because of its smallness. Before his name had fully been spoken, before the room had fully registered the announcement, and before the applause had fully begun, Song Hye-kyo's hands moved. Not dramatically. The specific small involuntary movement of hands that belong to a person whose body has registered important news before the social awareness of being observed has had time to produce the managed response that the social context calls for. Her hands came together in the way that hands come together when the body wants to express something before the mind has decided on the appropriate expression. And the movement was caught by a camera that was pointed at the audience rather than the stage and that captured something that was not being performed for it. This is the most important detail in the entire story. The hands before the applause. The body registering his name being called in the specific physical way of someone for whom his name being called in that context means something entirely personal and entirely beyond the scope of professional interest in a colleague's achievement. Her hands moved because something moved inside her that her body responded to before her composure could organize the response into something more contained. That involuntary movement is the first and perhaps the most diagnostic piece of evidence in the full account of what Song Hye-kyo's face and body showed while Lee Min-ho accepted his award. The applause arrived from the room and she joined it, and the joining of it had the quality of release that the preceding small involuntary moment had built toward. She was not applauding in the polite and appropriate way of an audience member acknowledging a colleague's recognition. She was applauding in the specific and fully inhabited way of someone who has been waiting for this moment with a particular kind of personal investment that belongs to people who have watched someone they love work toward something and who receive the recognition of that work with the full force of the feeling that the watching has accumulated. She was applauding him. Not the award. Not the achievement in its professional and industry-facing sense. The specific person she knows in the most complete available way and whose professional recognition she was receiving on behalf of everything she knows about what it cost him to be standing on that stage accepting it. Her face during the applause is the element of the story that has produced the most sustained and the most personally expressed responses from the people who have seen the footage that has circulated. And examining what her face was doing requires the specific attention to the difference between the face that is being managed and the face that is simply present. Song Hye-kyo's face during the applause for her husband's award was simply present. The composition that had been its default state from the moment she arrived at the venue was gone. Not replaced by dramatic or performed emotion. Gone, in the specific way of composition that has been exceeded by something larger than its capacity to contain, leaving in its place the actual interior state of the person behind it. She was proud. This is the word that appears in every account from people who saw her in that moment, and who have been asked to describe what they observed. Not pleased in the mild and professional sense. Not happy in the general and social sense. Proud in the deep and personal and completely involuntary sense of someone whose love for the person being honored is so integrated into how they experience that person's achievements that the achievements arrive not as external events but as personal ones. She was proud of him the way that people are proud of things they have been part of. Not in the credit-claiming sense but in the deep participatory sense of someone who has been present for and invested in the journey that produced the arrival. She has been present for his journey. She knows what the recognition being offered on that stage represents in terms of the actual work and the actual commitment and the actual person who produced it. And that knowledge is what her face showed while the room applauded and the cameras were pointed at the stage. He looked for her. This is the detail that has broken the fandom most completely, and that has been described by everyone close to the couple who was present that evening as the moment that the entire room felt rather than simply witnessed. He accepted the award and he made the appropriate acknowledgments and he delivered the portion of the acceptance that belonged to the professional context of the evening, and then he looked into the audience. Not in the general way of a speaker making eye contact with the room to establish connection and presence. In the specific way of someone looking for a particular person in a crowd because finding that person is the most important thing happening in the room from their perspective and everything else is secondary to the finding. He found her. The accounts of people who watched this exchange from various positions in the room describe what happened when their eyes met as one of those moments that rooms produce occasionally that are felt by everyone present as something beyond the ordinary. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. The quiet and complete and entirely private quality of two people finding each other across a crowded room in a moment that belongs entirely to them despite occurring in the most public context available. He found her face in the audience, and what his face did when he found it was the mirror image of what her face had been doing while she watched him win. The same pride. The same completeness. The same specific quality of a person who has arrived at the moment they were moving toward and who is receiving it with a full depth of everything they understand about how the arriving happened and what it cost and what it means. He held her gaze for a moment that the people present describe as longer than the professional context typically allows for without becoming something that demands the room's attention. It was long enough to be unmistakably intentional and short enough to remain private in the way that this couple always manages to make their most significant exchanges private even when they are happening in public. And in that moment, in the few seconds of held gaze between the man on the stage and the woman in the audience who had come to watch him win, the entire history of Hye-kyo was present. The rejection and the patience and the years of quiet and the gradual opening and the yes and the wedding and the sun and the midnight kitchen and the sketchbook and the handwritten note and the name change and everything that preceded and followed every one of those things. All of it was in that look. And everyone in the room who was paying attention could feel that it was there even if they could not see what it contained. Let us talk about the acceptance speech because the speech is the element of the evening that has generated the most discussion and the most emotional response from the fandom and from the wider audience of people who have encountered the story through the general circulation of entertainment news. Award acceptance speeches are a specific genre of public communication that operates under particular constraints and conventions. They are brief. They are expected to acknowledge specific people in specific orders. They are delivered in the professional context of an industry occasion, and are therefore shaped by the professional norms of that occasion in ways that usually prevent them from becoming too personal or too revealing of interior states that the occasion does not specifically call for. Most acceptance speeches by major Korean entertainment figures are warm and grateful and professionally appropriate, and entirely predictable in their general structure and content. Lee Min-ho's speech on this evening was all of those things and also something else. The something else is the part that has produced the response it has produced, and that deserves examination in its full context. He thanked the production and the director and the crew and the fellow cast members in the appropriate order, and with a genuine and specific warmth of someone who has been well served by the collaboration they are acknowledging. All of that was present and real and entirely consistent with who he is in his professional relationships. And then he paused. The pause was not long. It was the specific quality of pause that belongs to a speaker who has arrived at something they are deciding in real time whether to include in what they are saying, who has reached the edge of the professional territory and is looking at what lies beyond it and making the decision in the moment about whether to step over the line or remain on the safe side of it. He stepped over it. Not dramatically, and not in the form of an elaborate personal declaration that would have shifted the tone of the evening in ways that the occasion did not specifically invite. In the quiet and specific form of someone acknowledging what actually matters most to them with the directness and the simplicity of a person who has arrived at such a complete peace with what they feel that they are no longer interested in managing the visibility of it, even in the most professional of contexts. He said her name. Not as a general acknowledgement of family support in the way that acceptance speeches often include. He said her name in the specific way of someone making the most personal statement available to them in the form that the professional context allowed, which is the form of naming the person who is the most significant presence in the life that the professional achievement is part of. He said her name and the room heard it and the cameras caught the room hearing it and simultaneously caught Song Hye-kyo in the audience receiving her name from his mouth in that context. And what her face did in the moment of receiving it is the detail that has produced the most quiet and the most complete and the most lasting emotional response from everyone who has seen the footage. Her composure, which had been making its way back across the preceding minutes of the speech as the initial overwhelm of his win settled into the more manageable state of being proud rather than being swept away by pride, departed again completely in the moment he said her name. Not in the dramatic way. In the way of someone who was not expecting to be seen in that context, who thought they had arrived at a position of sufficient equilibrium to observe the rest of the evening without their face doing anything that the evening's cameras would find particularly interesting, and who was surprised back into the full visibility of their interior state by the specific and personal act of being named by someone who loves them in front of everyone. She touched her face. This gesture, small and entirely involuntary and produced by whatever combination of surprise and emotion and the specific and overwhelming quality of being acknowledged publicly by the person who is your whole private life, is the gesture that has been paused on and returned to and described with the most careful attention of everything in the footage of this evening. Her hand came to her face in the way that hands come to faces when a person is trying to manage a feeling that has become too present for their expression to contain without intervention. Not the gesture of distress. The gesture of being moved beyond the available capacity for composed reception. The gesture of someone who needed a moment, and whose body knew it needed a moment before their mind had fully arrived at the same conclusion. The room reacted to the moment in the specific way of rooms that have been given access to something genuinely private and genuinely beautiful. There was warmth. The kind of warmth that collective human spaces produce when the people in them have witnessed something real occurring between two people who had not necessarily intended to produce a public moment, but who were caught in one anyway by the simple mechanism of feelings too large to be entirely contained within the professional boundaries of the occasion. Industry professionals who attend award ceremonies in the specific role of people who have seen everything and are rarely surprised by what they see describe the exchange between Lee Min-ho on stage and Song Hye-kyo in the audience as one of the more genuinely affecting things they had witnessed at a professional event in recent years. The genuineness is what they responded to. Not the romance of the gesture, though it was romantic. The genuineness. The unmistakable quality of something happening between two people that was not designed for the room but that the room was privileged to be present for. Now let us talk about what happened after the ceremony because the after is its own chapter of this story, and one that has been described by people close to the couple with a specific affection of people who witnessed a private reunion that they understood was not intended to be witnessed but that they are glad to have seen. He came to her as soon as the stage obligations of the evening allowed for the coming, which is to say as soon as the photographs and the congratulations and the professional obligations that immediately follow a major award had been navigated with sufficient efficiency that he was free to move through the room in the direction that he had been oriented toward from the moment he stepped off the stage. He came to her in the unhurried and entirely purposeful way that he always comes to her, the way that the crew saw on the film set when she appeared on his screen and the smile arrived, the way that the 60 seconds of room crossing captured the essence of. She was waiting. Not in the anxious or the performing way of someone who is managing their visibility in a room full of industry observers while they wait for someone to come to them. In the quiet and settled and entirely self-possessed way of Song Hye-kyo waiting for Lee Min-ho, which is the specific quality of waiting that belongs to someone who is completely certain that the person they are waiting for is coming, and who therefore does not need to do anything with the waiting except occupy it with the same composed presence they occupy everything else with. She waited and he came, and what happened when he reached her has been described by the single person who was close enough to observe it with any clarity as brief and quiet and completely private in the way of a moment that belongs to two people, and that the presence of a third person at proximity does not actually intrude upon because the two people inside it are too completely absorbed in it to be interrupted by observation. He said something to her. She responded. The exchange was short and the content is entirely protected by the privacy of the two people who had it. What the observer could report was the quality of it, which was the same quality that has characterized every private exchange between these two people that has ever been observed by anyone lucky enough to be in the right position at the right moment. Complete. Mutual. Characterized by the specific ease of people who have been talking to each other long enough that the talking has its own established language that is partly theirs and partly the language of the specific history they share. What this evening confirms about Hye-kyo is the same thing that every significant moment in this relationship confirms, through the different and specific lens that a public professional occasion offers. It confirms that the love is present in every context. The professional and the personal. The public and the private. The grand stage moment and the quiet audience moment and the post-ceremony reunion that happened in a corner of a room full of people who were mostly looking elsewhere. It confirms that Song Hye-kyo did not simply marry a man who loves her. She married a man whose love for her is so thoroughly present in everything he does and every environment he occupies that it expresses itself publicly on award stages in the form of her name spoken with a specific quality of meaning that her name has only when he says it. And it confirms that she did not simply become someone's wife. She became the person who sits in an audience watching the person she loves receive professional recognition and whose face tells the whole story of everything she knows about who he is and what the recognition represents and what their life together is built from, before the composure can arrive to contain what the face is saying. Her hands moved first. Before the applause. Before the room had finished registering his name. Her hands moved and the movement told the truth, and the truth is that Song Hye-kyo watches Lee Min-ho with the pride of someone who knows him from the inside and who receives his achievements as personal ones because his life is her life and his work is something she has been present for and invested in and completely supportive of in the private and daily and entirely unglamorous ways that real support looks like. That is what the evening showed. That is the whole story. And it is one of the most beautiful things this relationship has ever produced for the world to witness. Drop everything in the comments right now and tell me which moment in this story hit you the hardest. Was it her hands moving before the applause? The exchange of looks between the stage and the audience? Her face when he said her name? Or the post-ceremony reunion that happened quietly in a corner while the room looked elsewhere? Tell me if you cried. Tell me how long you have been following this story, and whether evenings like this one feel like the confirmation you have always been building toward. Share this with every single Hye-kyo fan who deserves to feel what this story produces and the people who love it like this video. And subscribe because Song Hye-kyo is going to keep watching Lee Min-ho win, and Lee Min-ho is going to keep finding her face in every crowd and saying her name in every context. We're saying it is the truest thing available to him, and you need to be here for every single one of those moments.